right now, there is a very high probability that, thousands of beginner aquarium hobbyists are standing right in front of their glass boxes, looking at a pile of translucent brown mush and making a terrible, terrible mistake.
Oh, absolutely. It breaks my heart every time I see it on the forums.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they are taking their brand new, highly anticipated carpeting plants, like scooping them out of the water and just throwing them directly into the
Yeah,
trash.
they just chuck them out.
And they do this because they think the plant is dead, but what they don't realize is that they are actively interrupting this miraculous, highly stressful biological transformation.
It really is a transformation.
That plant isn't dead at all. It is literally suffocating, panicking, and attempting to rapidly alter its own cellular structure to survive a completely alien environment.
Welcome to the Tank Guide Life podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Today, we are opening up the vault from our work over at Fish Keeping Life Co. for a masterclass on the elusive, highly sought-after aquarium carpet. We're going on a deep dive today. A very deep dive. This is such a crucial topic.
We really want to look at the biology, the chemistry, and honestly, the absolute heartbreak of trying to grow a lush underwater lawn. Because you see these pictures online and you think, I want that.
Yeah, it really is a heartbreak for so many people. I mean,
Yeah.
the scenario you just described, right? The melting plant.
Rubbish.
The mush, exactly. It is probably the single biggest hurdle that drives newcomers away from the planted tank side of the hobby.
Because it's so discouraging. You spend all this money and then boom, slime.
Totally discouraging. But, to understand why that plant is turning to mush, and more importantly, how to actually achieve that pristine, golf course look at the bottom of your tank without taking out a second mortgage for high-tech gear, we have to completely change how we view these organisms.
Okay, so a mindset shift.
Exactly. We have to look at them not as static decorations, but as these highly dynamic, adaptable survivalists.
I love that, survivalists. I mean, I definitely want to get to the bottom of that whole mush phenomenon later, but let's lay the groundwork first.
Sure, sounds good.
We are talking about foreground plants, but specifically plants that spread, right? I want to skip the really basic definitions because, honestly, anyone who has spent 5 minutes looking at aquascaping photos online knows what a carpet looks like.
Oh yeah, those iconic sweeping green lawns.
Exactly. Let's look at the history and the evolution instead, because, when did we actually start putting lawns underwater?
That's a fascinating question.
Right, because if you look at photos of aquariums from the 1970s or, say, the early 80s, the bottom of the tank is just neon gravel and maybe a plastic diver.
The bubbling treasure chest.
Yes, the bubbling treasure chest. There are no sweeping, forced perspective meadows in those old tanks. So where did this come from?
Well, that aesthetic shift is almost entirely credited to the late Takashi Amano back in the 1980s and 90s.
Okay, the legend himself.
Yeah, exactly. Before Amano, the pinnacle of planted tanks was the Dutch style.
And that's the really organized one, right?
Highly regimented.
Yeah.
It involved these massive, dense bushes of stem plants trimmed into neat little streets.
Oh, like a botanical garden?
Yes, it was beautiful, but it looked like a carefully curated, unnatural botanical garden. Amano introduced the nature aquarium style. He actually observed how rivers and forests looked in the wild, and he realized that negative space, like the empty, low-lying areas, was just as important as the tall structures.
So he brought the empty space to the forefront.
Literally to the forefront. He started using plants like Glossostigma latinoides, which was virtually unknown in the hobby at the time, to create these sweeping, low-lying foregrounds.
And the visual trick it plays on the human eye is just staggering. I mean, if you take a standard 20-gallon tank, which is a pretty small glass box, really,
Very small.
and you put a tall Amazon sword plant right in the front, the tank instantly feels cramped. You've basically hit a visual wall.
Yeah, you block the entire view.
But if you take that exact same 20-gallon tank, slope the dirt up toward the back, and cover the entire front half in a dense 1-inch tall carpet, suddenly that tiny 20-gallon tank looks like a sprawling hillside.
It creates forced perspective.
Exactly. It creates scale.
Yeah, by using plants with incredibly tiny leaves, the brain is tricked into thinking it is looking at a massive landscape from a great distance.
It's an optical illusion.
It is. But achieving that look requires plants with a very specific and honestly somewhat unusual evolutionary trait.
Okay, what trait is that?
The runner. Or, in botanical terms, the stolon.
Right, because most plants we think of, out in the real world, they want to grow upward.
They want the sun.
Yeah, they want to beat out their neighbors to reach the canopy and soak up the light. Carpeting plants seem to actively reject that entire strategy. They just want to hug the dirt.
They really do.
So how do they actually know to move sideways across the bottom of an aquarium? Like, what is the mechanism driving that horizontal spread?
Okay, so it comes down to a phenomenon called plagiotropism.
Plagiotropism. Say that 5 times fast.
Right. Most stems exhibit negative gravitropism, so they want to grow away from gravity straight up.
Makes sense.
But stolons, these horizontal runners we're talking about, are programmed to grow perpendicular to gravity.
Wait, how do they know where gravity is if they are underwater and floating around?
It's amazing. Inside the cells of these runners are specialized starch grains called statoliths.
Statoliths.
Think of them like microscopic spirit levels, like a carpenter's level.
Oh, wow. That's a great visual.
As gravity pulls these heavy starch grains to the bottom of the cell, it physically dictates the distribution of growth hormones, primarily auxins.
So the starch falls down, and that tells the hormone where to go.
Exactly, ensuring the runner stays completely flat along the substrate instead of pointing up.
So the plant has microscopic internal sensors constantly telling it where down is, just so it can deliberately crawl along the surface.
Yes, that's exactly what it's doing.
That is absolutely incredible. And as it crawls, it creates clones of itself, right?
Basically, yes.
It's kind of like strawberries in a garden, I guess. The mother plant shoots out this horizontal vine, and every couple of inches, a node hits the soil, shoots down its own independent roots, and pushes up a completely new cluster of leaves.
That is a perfect analogy. And that interconnected network is actually the foundation of a stable ecosystem.
Because they're all tied together.
Right. We'll get into the biochemical benefits of that later. But the interconnectedness is key. When one part of the carpet finds a nutrient-rich pocket in the substrate, it can theoretically shuttle those resources through the stolon network to support new growth in a completely nutrient-poor area.
Oh, so they feed each other. They are sharing resources to conquer territory.
They are highly efficient colonizers.
Okay, so if these plants are highly evolved territorial conquerors with, microscopic gravity sensors, why is it so notoriously difficult to grow them?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because if you go on any forum right now and say, hey, I want to grow a carpet, the immediate response from the community is always, you need a pressurized carbon dioxide system.
Always. Every single time.
There is a massive, persistent belief that a low-tech carpet is a complete myth. And I really want to challenge that today on this deep dive.
I agree. We need to challenge it.
Because if CO2 is just a speed limit, as I've often heard it described, why do certain plants literally dissolve and die without it? That sounds a lot more like acute starvation than just, driving under the speed limit.
That is a brilliant distinction, and you are absolutely right to challenge that speed limit simplification. It is starvation.
Okay, so why are they starving?
To understand why, we have to look at the primary engine of photosynthesis, which is an enzyme called rubisco.
Rubisco.
Yeah. Rubisco is responsible for taking inorganic carbon from the environment and fixing it into organic sugars. Here is the flaw in the design, though. Rubisco is incredibly inefficient.
Really? Nature made an inefficient enzyme.
Oh, yes. It actually has a terrible habit of accidentally grabbing oxygen instead of carbon dioxide, which completely wastes the plant's energy in a process called photorespiration.
So the engine that powers the plant is fundamentally flawed and literally grabs the wrong molecules out of the water.
Exactly. Now, in the atmosphere up here where we breathe, where carbon dioxide is relatively plentiful and diffuses instantly, terrestrial plants manage just fine despite the flaw.
Sure, because there's so much carbon around.
Right. But underwater, gas exchange is an absolute nightmare. Carbon dioxide diffuses 10,000 times slower in water than it does in air.
10,000 times slower.
10,000 times. So, an aquatic plant is sitting there trying to run its rubisco engine, but the carbon is barely trickling in.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm getting this.
Go for it.
Let's imagine the plant is a manufacturing factory.
Okay, I like that.
The light hitting the leaves is the conveyor belt constantly delivering raw materials like photons of energy.
Perfect.
And the carbon dioxide molecules and the nutrients, those are the factory workers who actually have to assemble those raw materials into a finished product, which is new plant growth.
That is a fantastic analogy. I like where this is going.
Okay, so in a high-tech tank, you are pumping pressurized CO2 gas directly into the water. You are essentially hiring thousands of highly skilled workers.
Yes, a massive labor force.
Because you have a massive workforce, You can crank the speed of the conveyor belt, the light up to maximum. You buy those incredibly intense, expensive LED lights.
Really fancy ones.
Right. The raw materials come flying down the line, the massive workforce assembles them instantly, and the plant grows at an explosive rate.
That is an incredibly accurate representation of high-tech landed tanks. That's why they grew so fast.
But in a low-tech tank, you don't inject CO2. The only carbon the plant gets is whatever naturally dissolves from the air at the surface of the water or whatever, the fish exhale.
Which is very little.
So your factory workforce is severely limited. You only have like 3 guys on the floor.
3 guys trying to do the work of thousands.
Exactly. So what happens if a beginner, frustrated by slow growth, goes out and buys that massive high-intensity light for their low-tech tank?
The factory collapses.
Because the conveyor belt is too fast.
Yes, you've just cranked the conveyor belt up to 100 miles an hour, but you still only have 3 workers. The raw materials, the light energy, just pile up on the factory floor.
That sounds disastrous.
In botanical terms, the plant absorbs more photon energy than it can physically process because it lacks the carbon to complete the photosynthetic reaction.
So the energy just gets stuck inside the plant.
Yes, and this creates a highly destructive reactive oxygen species within the plant cells. The plant literally begins to damage itself from the inside out.
Oh, wow. It's light toxicity.
Precisely. It is toxic to give a plant too much light if it doesn't have the carbon to process it. And to make matters worse, as the plant shuts down to protect itself, all those unused raw materials and excess nutrients in the water are just sitting there, completely available.
Oh, no. I know where this is going.
And do you know what organism requires a tiny microscopic fraction of the carbon that a complex carpet plant requires? Algae. Algae are the opportunistic scavengers of the aquatic world. They don't need roots, they don't need complex cellular structures, and their carbon demand is incredibly low.
So they just swoop in and steal the raw materials.
If you blast a carbon-limited tank with highlight, you aren't going to get a faster carpet. You are going to get an absolute explosion of hair algae, blackbeard algae, and green spot algae.
And that algae just covers everything, right?
It will rapidly colonize the very leaves of the plant you are trying to save, eventually blocking all light and killing it entirely.
This perfectly explains why beginners fail so spectacularly. I mean, we've seen it in our observations over and over. They see slow growth, they assume the plant needs more light, they buy a stronger light, they trigger an algae bloom, the algae smothers the carpet, and the whole system crashes.
It happens every day. It is a fatal misunderstanding of the limiting factor.
The limiting factor in a low-tech tank is almost always carbon. You cannot force growth with light if the carbon isn't there.
Exactly. You just can't do it.
So, if blasting it with light is lethal, what happens if we go the other way?
Okay, let's explore that.
Let's say a beginner has a very standard, somewhat dim light that came with their basic beginner aquarium kit. What is the physiological response of a carpeting plant when the conveyor belt is running too slowly?
That triggers a completely different, highly specific survival mechanism called etiolation.
Etiolation.
Let's go back to those gravity sensors we talked about, the statoliths and the growth hormones, the auxins.
Right, the internal levelers.
When a plant senses that it is not receiving sufficient photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR, its primary directive completely shifts from conquer territory to find the sun.
It panics because it thinks it's being shaded out by a taller plant or a rock, maybe.
Exactly. The plant uses specialized photoreceptors called phytochromes to detect the ratio of red to far red light.
So it's basically tasting the light to see what kind it is.
Yes. If the light is dim, or if it has the spectral signature of light that has already passed through the canopy of leaves above it, the plant actively redistributes its auxins.
So it moves the hormones around?
Instead of sending the auxins to the stolons to grow horizontally along the dirt, it pumps them into the vertical stems. It causes the cells on the shaded side of the stem to rapidly elongate, physically stretching the plant upward.
Oh, so it stands on its tiptoes.
It stretches as far as it can.
It abandons the carpet strategy entirely and tries to become a stem plant to survive.
Yes, survival mode.
This is exactly why we constantly see posts on the tank guide from confused hobbyists asking why their supposedly low-lying carpet is like 5 inches tall and looks like a spindly, leggy mess.
Yes, they haven't been sold the wrong plant. They are simply watching the plant's desperation tactics in real time.
They think the store scammed them, but really the plant is just starving for light.
The key to lighting a low-tech carpet is finding the absolute sweet spot.
The Goldilocks zone.
Right. You need enough PAR to satisfy the plant's basic energy requirements so it doesn't etiolate, but not so much intensity that you outpace your natural, highly limited carbon supply and trigger an algae farm.
And based on our research and, thousands of tank logs we've looked at, that sweet spot usually isn't about maximum brightness anyway. It's about consistency and spectrum.
Consistency is everything.
A moderate light, operating in the correct red and blue spectrums for photosynthesis, left on for a highly consistent 8 hours a day, will yield vastly superior results to a blazing spotlight turned on randomly just whenever you remember.
Oh, random lighting is the worst. Consistency allows the plant to set a metabolic rhythm. That rhythm is crucial for slow, steady, low-tech growth.
Okay, we've dissected the light and carbon relationship. Let's move down to the foundation. Let's talk about the dirt.
Ah, the substrate.
We established that these plants are creating massive interconnected networks of roots. Now, obviously, nutrient-rich commercial aquasoil is the gold standard here.
Oh, sure.
Aquasoil is basically baked clay pellets loaded with ammonia, nitrogen, and trace minerals. But aquasoil is incredibly expensive. It breaks down into mud over time, and if you disturb it, it turns your water into a muddy soup.
A total mess.
The prevailing wisdom is that you cannot grow a carpet in plain, inert sand or standard aquarium gravel, that it's just impossible.
Prevailing wisdom is often wrong, and our extensive observations prove it.
Good. I love breaking rules.
To understand why inert sand can work, we have to talk about cation exchange capacity, or CEC.
Cation exchange capacity. Okay, break that down for me.
In a high-end aquasoil, the clay particles actually have a negative electrical charge.
Right.
Nutrients like ammonium, potassium, and calcium have a positive charge. They are cations.
So opposites attract. The soil acts like a magnet, holding onto the nutrients until the plant roots come along and pry them away.
Exactly. It's a nutrient bank.
Yeah.
But inert substrates, like standard pool filter sand or basic pet store gravel, have zero CEC. They're chemically dead. They hold nothing. If you pour liquid fertilizer into a tank with sand, the nutrients just float around in the water column until the filter sucks them up or algae consumes them. The sand doesn't capture anything at all.
But carpeting plants are heavy root feeders. If the sand is dead, how are they surviving? This is where the big hack comes in, right? Root tabs.
Root cabs are the great equalizer for the budget aquarist.
They really are.
These are highly concentrated capsules of dry fertilizer. By physically pushing these capsules deep into the inert sand, directly under the root zone of the carpeting plants, you are bypassing the need for CEC entirely.
You are basically creating localized, slow-release nutrient bombs under the sand.
Yes, nutrient bombs. The capsule dissolves very slowly over months. Because it is buried deep under the sand, those nutrients are completely inaccessible to the algae floating in the water column above.
Because the algae can't reach into the sand.
Exactly. But as the carpeting plant's stolons travel horizontally through the sand, their microscopic root hairs intercept these nutrient pockets. It is highly efficient, targeted feeding.
It's like finding buried treasure for the plant.
It really is.
And there is another massive biological benefit to having a dense root network crawling through your sand, isn't there? I want to talk about hydrogen sulfide, because this is the absolute nightmare scenario for deep sand beds.
Oh, it is a nightmare. It crashes tanks.
Explain how that happens.
Well, in a thick layer of sand, oxygen cannot penetrate deeply. The lower layers become anaerobic, meaning totally devoid of oxygen.
Right.
Certain types of bacteria thrive in these anaerobic conditions, and as a byproduct of their metabolism, they produce hydrogen sulfide gas.
That's that terrible rotten egg smell when you poke the sand.
Yes. And it's highly toxic. If a bubble of that gas releases into the water column, it can kill your livestock almost instantly.
So how do the plants fix this?
Here is the brilliant evolutionary trick of aquatic plants. It's a process called radial oxygen loss.
Radial oxygen loss.
Right. Aquatic plants know their roots are buried in anoxic mud. To prevent their own roots from suffocating, the plant takes oxygen generated during photosynthesis in the leaves and channels it down through specialized hollow tubes in the stem called parenchyma.
Wait, they have hollow tubes inside them?
Yes, straight down into the root system.
So they pipe their own oxygen down to the roots. That's like scuba gear for plants.
Yes, and crucially, some of that oxygen actually leaks out of the roots and into the surrounding soil. This is radial oxygen loss.
So it's injecting oxygen into the sand.
A dense carpet of plants is literally pumping oxygen deep into your sand bed 24 hours a day. This oxygenates the substrate, completely prevents the formation of anaerobic pockets, neutralizes hydrogen sulfide, and promotes the growth of beneficial aerobic nitrifying bacteria in the sand.
I am continually blown away by how functional these plants are. I mean, they aren't just a pretty lawn. They are an active oxygen-pumping biofilter that stabilizes the entire chemical foundation of the aquarium.
They are the engine of the ecosystem. That's why we always push for ecosystem-focused keeping on the show.
Okay, so the foundation is set. We understand the carbon factory, the light sweet spot, the root tabs, and the oxygen plumbing. Now, let's put this knowledge to the test against the actual plants you find at the store.
Yes, let's talk species.
Because if you walk into a big box pet retailer, they're going to push specific plants on you. And based on everything we see in our community on the tank guide, these specific plants are setting beginners up for a spectacular failure in a low-tech environment.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's dissect the tricky classics.
This is a vital conversation because managing expectations is the only way to survive the first 6 months of this hobby. If you pick the wrong plant, you will quit.
Let's start with the absolute darling of the internet, Monte Carlo, my chrysanthemum Tweety Eye.
Monte Carlo.
If you watch any famous aquascaping tutorial online, they are almost certainly using Monte Carlo. It's universally touted as the easy, true carpet. But in our experience, this plant breaks a staggering number of hearts. Why does Monte Carlo struggle so much without injected CO2?
We have to look at its morphology and its natural growth rate. Monte Carlo has slightly larger, broader leaves compared to something like HC Cuba. It also has thicker, more robust stems.
Which makes it easier to plant, right?
It makes it physically easier to handle and plant with tweezers, which is exactly why it earned the easy label in the first place. And unlike the highly advanced plants, Monte Carlo's metabolic baseline is just low enough that it won't instantly dissolve in a low-tech tank.
It can survive on our limited three-man factory workforce.
It can survive, but surviving is not thriving. Without injected CO2, its growth rate drops to an absolute crawl. It might take 8 to 12 months to cover a small area.
Wow, a year just for a patch.
And this incredibly slow growth exposes its fatal flaw in a low-tech environment, which is algae vulnerability.
Because it's growing so slowly, the older leaves are just sitting there statically under the light. They become little targets.
Exactly. Those broad, flat little leaves become prime real estate. In a newly set up tank, which is when beginners usually try to grow a carpet, the tank undergoes a phase where silicates leach from the glass and the substrate.
Oh, I know what this is.
This triggers a massive bloom of diatoms, which is that ugly brown dust that coats everything in a new tank.
Oh, the dreaded brown diatom phase. Every single new tank gets it. It's so ugly.
In a high-tech tank, the Monte Carlo is growing so fast that it constantly produces fresh, clean leaves, basically outgrowing the diatom.
It sheds them faster than they can attach.
Right. But in a low-tech tank, the Monte Carlo is stagnant. The diatoms settle heavily on the leaves, completely blocking out the light.
And then what?
The plant can no longer photosynthesize. The factory shuts down, and the patches of Monte Carlo slowly rot away. You end up with a sparse, patchy brown mess instead of a lush green lawn.
It's a vicious cycle. The slow growth invites algae. The algae blocks the light, which slows the growth even further until death.
That's very frustrating.
Okay, what about the plant that probably sells more than any other, based purely on its name? Dwarf hairgrass. Eleocharis parvula.
Oh, dwarf hairgrass.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. It looks exactly like regular lawn grass. Grass is the most resilient weed on the planet. I mean, I spend half my summer trying to stop grass from growing out of the concrete cracks in my driveway. Why on earth is it so hard to grow grass underwater?
Well, because your driveway is a high-tech environment.
Wait, what? My driveway?
Think about it. The grass in your driveway has access to the atmosphere, which means infinite, instantly accessible carbon dioxide.
True.
It is being blasted by direct, unfiltered sunlight, which is pulling roughly 2,000 PAR. Your driveway is the ultimate high-energy environment.
I never thought of it that way.
Your low-tech aquarium has severely limited, slowly diffusing dissolved carbon, and maybe 40 or 50 PAR from a standard LED light.
That is a phenomenal perspective shift. We think of our tanks as protected havens, but physiologically, for a plant, a low-tech aquarium is an incredibly hostile, nutrient-starved desert compared to a literal crack in the pavement.
Precisely. Dwarf hairgrass relies heavily on rapid, aggressive runner production to form a dense mat. Without the energy surplus provided by CO2, it simply lacks the fuel to push those stolons through the substrate.
It just doesn't have the energy to spread.
In a low-tech tank, you might plant a plug of hairgrass, And 6 months later, that exact same plug will still be sitting there, maybe a little taller, maybe covered in some hair algae, but it will not have spread.
It just sits there.
It forms little isolated tufts that look like a balding head of hair.
Mm-hmm.
It rarely ever merges into a cohesive lawn.
A balding head of hair. That is tragically accurate. You see these sad little clumps sticking up randomly across the sand.
It's not the lift people want.
What about microsword? Waliopsis brasiliensis. It has a slightly wider blade. It looks a bit more substantial than hairgrass. People often pivot to this when hairgrass fails.
Microsword is undeniably hardier in terms of physical toughness. The leaves are rigid and less prone to melting, but we run into the exact same energetic bottleneck.
The carbon limitation.
Right. The acclimation period for microsword in a low-tech environment is legendary for its stubbornness. It will sit completely dormant for months as it slowly tries to build a root system.
Just doing nothing on top.
And because the blades are wider and flatter than hairgrass, it acts as a magnet for blackbeard algae, which is notoriously difficult to eradicate once it takes hold on a slow-growing leaf.
So Monte Carlo gets smothered by diatoms, hairgrass refuses to spread and looks like a bad hair transplant, and microsword is an algae magnet that refuses to wake up.
That's the reality of the tricky classics.
This is the reality check that so many people need.
Huh.
But before we get to the actual solutions, the plants that do work, I want to briefly touch on the absolute heartbreak plants, the ones that beginners should avoid at all costs.
You are referring to Hemianthus calitricoides, commonly known as H.C. cuba, and Glossostigma elatinoides.
Yes. H.C. cuba is arguably the most beautiful plant in the hobby. I mean, it has these impossibly tiny, bright green, perfectly round leaves. It looks like a miniature fairy garden. It is intoxicating to look at. Why is it a death sentence for a beginner?
It comes back to the metabolic floor we discussed earlier. H.C. cuba has an incredibly high baseline energy requirement just to stay alive.
It's a high-performance engine.
It physically cannot downregulate its metabolism enough to survive on our three-man factory crew. If you put H.C. cuba in a low-tech tank, it will starve to death, break down at the cellular level, and dissolve into water-polluting mush within a week.
A total meltdown. What about the other one, Glossostigma?
Glossostigma is similar, but its failure mode is different. Without intense high-PR lighting, Glossostigma's statoliths and phytochromes instantly trigger massive etiolation.
Oh, the stretching.
It will refuse to carpet and will instead grow straight up toward the surface, looking like a chaotic, tangled weed rather than a carpet.
So the fairy garden is completely off limits until you invest in a pressurized CO2 canister. Message received. Now, we've broken everyone's hearts. We've told them the plants they see on Instagram are mostly illusions powered by expensive gas. We need to offer salvation.
Yes, let's give them some hope.
We need to introduce the low-tech all-stars. These are the plants that our team at Fishkeeping Life Co. has rigorously tested and proven to succeed in dirt-simple, carbon-limited tanks.
Salvation is entirely possible. It just requires a slight adjustment in aesthetic expectations.
Yeah.
The true low-tech all-stars might not look like a manicured pudding green, but they offer a lush, vibrant, and deeply natural beauty that is far more rewarding because it is genuinely sustainable.
Let's kick this off with my absolute favorite. I call this plant the speedster of the low-tech world. It is the plant I recommend to literally anyone who asks me how to start. Dwarf Sagittaria. Sagittaria subulata.
A fantastic choice.
Let's do a deep dive on why this plant succeeds where hairgrass fails so miserably.
Dwarf Sagittaria is an absolute powerhouse. It belongs to a genus of aquatic plants that are highly adapted to fluctuating, low-nutrient environments in the wild.
So it's used to things being tough.
Exactly. Its biological superpower is its aggressive root system and runner production. Even without injected CO2, if you give Dwarf Sagittaria a few root tabs, it will rapidly acclimate and begin shooting thick white stolons through the substrate.
It is so eager to grow.
Yeah.
And physically, it looks like a thicker, more robust version of lawn grass. The blades are wider and significantly tougher than hairgrass.
That toughness is key. The thicker cuticle on the leaf surface makes it much more resistant to algae attachment. It can actively outcompete algae for nutrients, utilizing the root tabs deep in the sand while starving the water column.
It's just a bully in the best way possible.
It really is. It is incredibly forgiving of water parameters, thriving in hard water, soft water, high pH, and low pH.
It is nearly indestructible. But in the spirit of our deep dive, we have to talk about its one very funny, slightly frustrating quirk. The word dwarf is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it?
It is highly dependent on environmental triggers. We discussed etiolation earlier, the stretching for light. Well, dwarf sag is highly sensitive to crowding.
Oh, when it gets too dense?
When it forms a dense carpet, The plants begin to shade each other out. The phytochromes detect the change in red-far red light ratios, and the plant decides, I need to get taller to survive this crowd.
So what does it do?
A plant that is supposed to be 2 inches tall will suddenly shoot up to 6, 8, or even 10 inches tall, essentially becoming a mid-ground or background jungle.
I've had this happen. I had a beautiful little lawn, and within a month, it turned into a wheat field that literally swallowed half my hardscape.
It will completely take over if you let it.
But honestly, if you embrace it, it looks incredibly natural. You can use it to your advantage by planting it in the back corners where it's shaded, letting it grow tall, and keeping it trimmed short in the front where the light is strongest.
It creates a wild, untamed riverbank aesthetic, which is beautiful in its own right. Now, if you want something that remains a bit more delicate, a bit softer than dwarf sag, our next all-star is the pygmy chainsword, Holanthium tenellum.
The natural meadow plant. I love the texture of this one. It feels less aggressive than dwarf sag.
It is significantly more delicate in appearance. The leaves are narrower, softer, and they have a natural curve to them, meaning they sway beautifully in the filter current.
That swaying movement is so relaxing to watch.
It spreads via runners exactly like dwarf sag, but the resulting network is much finer.
And from an ecosystem perspective, this is the ultimate habitat plant, isn't it?
Absolutely. Because the leaves are dense but incredibly soft, it creates a labyrinth of microhabitats right on the substrate. It is the perfect nursery.
A nursery for babies.
Yes. If you keep cherry shrimp, or if you are breeding small nanofish like celestial pearl danios, a pygmy chain sword carpet provides total cover for the fry. It protects them from larger fish while giving them an infinite buffet of microorganisms to graze on.
It's essentially an underwater daycare center. Okay, we have our two grass-like options. But what if a hobbyist wants a completely different texture? What if they are tired of the grassy look?
We have options for that.
This brings us to a highly unique genus, Marsilea. Specifically, Marsilea hirsuta. I call this plant the lesson in extreme patience.
Marsilea is fascinating botanically because it exhibits a trait called heterophily.
Heterophily. Okay, what does that mean?
This means the plant can produce drastically different leaf shapes depending on the environmental conditions. When you buy Marsilea, it often looks like a tiny four-leaf clover.
Like a literal four-leaf clover.
Yes, exactly. But once submerged in a low-tech tank, as it adapts, it might push out single-lobed leaves, two-lobed leaves, or return to the clover shape.
It's a shapeshifter. It gives the substrate this incredibly charming, varied texture. It doesn't look like a uniform lawn. It looks like a rich forest floor. But why is it a lesson in patience?
Because its survival strategy in a low-tech environment is to heavily prioritize subterranean infrastructure over visible foliage.
It focuses on the roots.
When you plant Marsilea, it will seem to do absolutely nothing for weeks, sometimes months. A beginner will stare at it, assume it's stunted, and want to tear it out.
I've been there. You just stare at this tiny clover for 6 weeks, wondering if you did something wrong.
But beneath the sand, the plant is frantically busy. It is building a massive, thick, deeply anchored runner network. It wants to secure its territory underground before it expends the precious energy required to grow leaves.
That's actually really smart.
Once that invisible infrastructure is complete, it will suddenly explode, popping up dozens of little clover leaves all across the tank simultaneously. It demands massive patience up front, but it rewards you with a carpet that is virtually indestructible and requires absolutely zero trimming once established.
It is building the plumbing in the basement before it builds the house. I love that. Okay, let's completely pivot. Our next low-tech all-star is my absolute favorite cheat code in the aquascaping world. It breaks all the rules we just established about runners and stolons. Pearlweed, Hemianthus micranthomoides.
We are definitely breaking our own rules here. We need to clarify the taxonomy. Pearlweed is not a carpeting plant. It is a stem plant.
It is a plant that naturally wants to grow straight up to the surface, hit the glass, and keep going. It possesses 0 horizontal runners. So how on earth are we recommending it as a beginner carpet?
Through aggressive mechanical intervention, we are exploiting a botanical concept called apical dominance.
Apical dominance.
In a stem plant, the main central growing tip, the apex, produces auxins that suppress the growth of lateral buds down the sides of the stem. The plant is directing all energy upward.
It wants to be a single tall tower.
Exactly. But if you take a pair of aquascaping scissors and you mercilessly chop the top of that plant off, you remove the source of the auxins. Apical dominance is broken.
Oh, so you free the side buds.
Suddenly, the lateral buds are released from suppression and the plant violently branches out to the sides, creating 2 or 3 new stems where there was only one.
So, to create a pearlweed carpet, you plant a few stems, wait for them to grow a few inches, and then you give them a brutal buzz cut. A literal buzz cut.
You cut them down to 1 inch tall. They branch out, they grow up again, you cut them down again, they branch out further. You are physically forcing the plant to grow horizontally by continually destroying its vertical progress.
It is the ultimate high-maintenance, low-tech hack. And because pearlweed grows incredibly fast, even without CO2, you can achieve a dense, lush, bright green thicket in a matter of weeks.
That's amazing.
Furthermore, every single top you trim off can simply be pushed back into the sand right next to the mother plant. It will grow new roots in days. You can buy one single $5 pot of pearlweed and propagate it endlessly to cover an entire 40-gallon tank.
It is the most budget-friendly carpet in existence. The caveat, of course, is the maintenance. If you get lazy and skip your weekly trimming session, apical dominance resumes, and within a month, your beautiful, neat carpet is a foot-tall, tangled jungle.
It requires dedication, but the results are undeniable. Now, for our final low-tech all-star, we have the polar opposite of the fast-growing, high-maintenance pearlweed. We have the indestructible slowpoke. Cryptocoryne parva. The crypt family is legendary. They are the bulletproof tanks of the planted aquarium world. They thrive in low light, they don't care about CO2, but they are usually massive mid-ground plants with huge, broad leaves. Parva is the tiny mutant exception.
Cryptocoryne parva is a true miniature. It naturally tops out at maybe an inch or two tall, and biologically it differs from everything we've discussed so far. It is not a stem plant, and it does not produce long traveling runners. It is a rosette plant.
A rosette, like a dandelion.
Exactly like a dandelion.
Yeah.
All of the leaves emerge from a central crown located right at the surface of the substrate, with a massive, deep taproot system below.
So how does a rosette plant spread to form a carpet if it doesn't have runners?
Slowly, painfully slowly. It reproduces by generating tiny offsets, essentially cloning itself right next to the mother plant's crown. It expands its footprint millimeter by millimeter, slowly creeping outward in a tight, dense cluster.
We are talking years, not months, to cover a large area.
Yes, years. To carpet a tank with parva in a reasonable time frame, you have to buy a massive amount of it up front and plant the individual crowns right next to each other. But the trade-off for this extreme slowness is unparalleled stability.
Because the roots are so deep.
Yes. It requires zero trimming. Its deep taproots make it completely immune to be uprooted by bottom-dwelling fish. Once established, it is immortal.
It is the ultimate set-it-and-forget-it plant. You trade time for money in the low-tech world. But speaking of time and patience, we need to address the elephant in the room. The phenomenon I mentioned at the very beginning of the show. The moment that causes thousands of beginners to quit in despair. Let's talk about the submerged transition, more commonly known as plant melt.
This process is the source of more panic and misinformation on the internet than anything else in the hobby. We have to peel back the curtain on the commercial aquatic plant industry to explain why this happens.
Yes, let's drop the bombshell fact that completely shadows a beginner's understanding of what they are actually buying at the pet store.
The vast, overwhelming majority of the aquatic plants you purchase were not grown underwater. They have never been submerged in an aquarium in their entire lives.
Wait, really?
They were grown immersed, meaning completely out of the water, with their roots in wet soil and their leaves exposed to the open air, usually in massive, highly humid commercial greenhouses or hydroponic trays.
They are selling us underwater plants that have never lived underwater. Why would the industry do this? It seems like a massive bait and switch.
It is purely a matter of economics driven by biology. We talked earlier about how carbon dioxide is the ultimate limiting factor and how it diffuses 10,000 times faster in the air than in water.
Right, the factory analogy.
The commercial nurseries know this. By growing the plants out of the water, the plants have access to the limitless, instantly available carbon dioxide of the atmosphere. The plants run their metabolic factories at maximum capacity. They grow 5–10 times faster than they would underwater.
So it's just much cheaper for them to produce.
Exactly. They are completely immune to algae because algae needs water to grow. And the resulting immersed leaves are thick, sturdy, and rigid, which means they can survive being packed in plastic tubes and shipped across the country in the back of a delivery truck.
Okay, from a business and logistical standpoint, it is brilliant. It allows them to produce cheap, healthy plants. But biologically, what does that mean for the plant when I take it home, bury its roots in the sand, and completely submerge it in my aquarium?
It induces a state of catastrophic physiological shock. The plant has spent its entire life developing morphological traits specifically adapted to the terrestrial environment.
Like what?
The leaves have developed a thick, waxy cuticle to prevent moisture loss in the air. The stomata, the microscopic pores the plant uses for gas exchange, are calibrated for atmospheric pressure. When you plunge that leaf underwater, that waxy cuticle becomes a barrier, and the stomata are essentially useless. The leaf is instantly suffocating. It cannot perform gas exchange in the water.
So the plant is literally drowning.
Literally drowning. And the plant's internal survival mechanisms instantly recognize this. The plant realizes that its current terrestrial leaves are not only useless, but they are a massive energetic liability.
So what does it do?
So the plant makes a radical, desperate decision. It triggers a massive release of ethylene gas internally, which signals the cells in the stems to undergo abscission. The plant actively cuts off the nutrient supply to its own terrestrial leaves.
It commits localized cellular suicide to save the main organism.
Exactly. The plant lets the old leaves die, turn translucent, and dissolve into mush. This is the melt.
Wow.
Simultaneously, the plant redirects every ounce of its remaining stored energy down into the crown and the root system. The roots, which are safely buried in the substrate, are still alive. The plant hunkers down, relies on its reserves, and slowly begins the agonizing process of growing entirely new, specialized submerged leaves that lack the waxy cuticle and have specialized structures capable of extracting dissolved carbon and oxygen directly from the water column.
So when a beginner is looking at their tank a week after planting and they see a pile of rotting brown slime where their beautiful green carpet used to be, the plant isn't dead, it is shedding its terrestrial form.
Yes.
I like to use the analogy of a winter coat. You were wearing a heavy, waxy winter coat in the freezing air. Suddenly, you are pushed into a swimming pool. If you try to swim in that winter coat, you will drown. You have to take the coat off, let it sink to the bottom, and put on a swimsuit to survive. The plant is just taking off its winter coat.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The roots are the swimmer, and they are still very much alive, waiting to put on the swimsuit. This is the tragedy of the beginner. They don't know about the winter coat. They see the melting leaves, they assume total failure, and they reach into the tank, grab the living, fighting roots, and throw the whole organism in the garbage.
Please, if you are listening to this right now and your new plants are melting, do not throw them away. Give them a chance. But what is the practical protocol here? What should the hobbyist actually do when the melt begins? Should they just leave the rotting mush in the tank?
You want to intervene gently to protect the water chemistry. A massive amount of rotting organic matter will cause an ammonia spike, which will trigger an algae bloom.
Which we definitely don't want.
Take your aquascaping scissors and very carefully snip away the worst of the melting leaves. Remove the dead tissue from the water, but do not, under any circumstances, pull on the roots or disturb the crown of the plant. Keep your lighting on its consistent 8-hour schedule. Do not dump a ton of liquid fertilizer into the water because the plant currently has no leaves to absorb it anyway. Just wait.
Give us a realistic timeline for this waiting period. Because in our modern Amazon Prime next-day delivery world, people's definition of waiting is about 48 hours.
You need to reset your internal clock to biological time. In a low-tech tank, a plant might take 2 full weeks just to finish melting off its old leaves. Then it might sit completely dormant for another 3 or 4 weeks while it rebuilds its root system and generates the cellular blueprints for submerged leaves.
Oh my goodness.
You might not see the very first tiny pale green underwater leaf emerge from the sand until a month or 6 weeks after you planted it.
6 weeks just to see a single new leaf.
And to see that plant actually begin pushing runners and forming a recognizable carpet, you are looking at 3 to 6 months.
It is a profound test of patience. But I will say, from my own experience and from the countless success stories we read on the Tank Guide, when you finally see that very first bright green runner shoot out across the white sand after 2 months of waiting, it is an intoxicating feeling of victory. You feel like a biological god. You successfully shepherded a living organism through a radical physiological metamorphosis.
It is deeply rewarding. And it brings us to the final and arguably most important conceptual framework of this entire deep dive.
Let's hear it.
We have analyzed the chemistry, the lighting, the species, and the melt. But a successful carpet doesn't exist in a vacuum. You cannot treat it like an isolated decoration that you place in a glass box. The carpet is intimately tied to everything else happening in that water. We need to look at the carpet as a fundamental component of the ecosystem.
I love this framing. When you view the tank as a holistic, interconnected machine, you start to understand why certain impatient actions lead to systemic failure. Let's look at some of the most common ecosystem-destroying traps we see in our community.
Yes, let's talk about those.
One of the biggest mistakes I see, and I'm totally guilty of this, is constant obsessive rearranging. A beginner plants a clump of crypt parva. 2 days later, they look at it from the couch and think, you know what, it would look better an inch to the left. So they reach in, pull it up, and replant it.
That is absolutely disastrous for any root-feeding plant, but especially for cryptocoryons. We just detailed how incredibly hard the plant works to establish its subterranean infrastructure.
Right, all that underground work.
When a plant roots into the sand, it develops thousands of microscopic root hairs that physically bond with the substrate particles to extract nutrients. When you casually pull that plant up to move it an inch, you are violently shearing off all those microscopic root hairs. The plant suffers massive physical trauma. You are resetting the 6-week biological clock back to day 0.
You are forcing it to start the recovery process all over again.
Exactly. You must pick your layout, plant it deep, and literally take your hands out of the tank. Let the roots anchor.
Another massive mistake, which we touched on briefly, is the over-application of liquid fertilizers. Beginners see their carpet growing slowly, they panic, and they pour 3 capfuls of comprehensive liquid fertilizer directly into the water column every week, thinking they are feeding the carpet.
And what is the inevitable result of that action?
The water turns into green soup, or the glass gets covered in green spot algae. Because, as we established, the low-tech all-stars we recommended, dwarf sag, pygmy chainsword, crips, are primarily root feeders. They are pulling their nutrition from the root tabs buried deep in the sand. They are largely ignoring the water column. When you dump liquid fertilizer into the water, you are throwing a buffet exclusively for the algae.
You are destabilizing the ecosystem's nutrient balance. But here is the incredible thing about a fully established carpet. Once it finally grows in, it becomes your tank's primary defense against that exact destabilization.
Wait, really? The carpet protects the tank from algae. How does the biochemistry of that work?
It is all about resource competition and nutrient sinks. Algae and higher plants are locked in a perpetual war for the same basic resources: light, carbon, and nutrients. When your carpet finally establishes and that massive, dense network of roots and stolons covers the entire bottom of the tank, it becomes an incredibly efficient biological sponge. It pulls excess organic waste, decaying fish food, and fish waste deep into the substrate, locking them away and metabolizing them for growth.
It strips the water column bare.
Exactly. It literally starves the algae. Furthermore, many aquatic plants engage in allelopathy, which is the secretion of specific biochemicals into the water that actively inhibit the growth of competing algae spores. The healthier and denser your carpet gets, the clearer your water becomes, and the cleaner your glass stays. The plants are actively performing the maintenance for you.
That is mind-blowing. The carpet isn't just aesthetic, it is a functional, aggressive biofilter. And it's not just a battle against algae. The carpet creates perfect harmony with the livestock in the tank as well. We touched on this with the pygmy chainsword acting as a nursery, but we have to talk about biofilm.
Biofilm is perhaps the most underappreciated component of a healthy aquarium ecosystem. Biofilm is a complex microscopic matrix of beneficial bacteria, protozoa, fungi, and microalgae that coats every submerged surface in a mature tank. To the human eye, it might look like a slight invisible slime coat, but to a dwarf shrimp, a snail, or a newborn fish fry, it is a 5-star, highly nutritious buffet. It is nature's perfect fish food.
And surface area is the key to biofilm production, right?
Yes, a bare glass bottom has very little surface area, but a dense carpet of thousands of tiny leaves and stems multiplies the available surface area in the tank by factors of 10 or 20. It creates a massive, sprawling grazing pasture. You are creating a complete self-sustaining food web where the waste of the fish feeds the roots of the carpet produces oxygen and surface area for biofilm, and the biofilm feeds the next generation of fish. It is a perfect, closed-loop, natural machine.
It really is a tiny slice of nature. But because this process is so incredibly slow in a low-tech environment, and because the daily changes are microscopic, it is notoriously difficult to stay motivated. You look at the tank every single day, so you don't notice the millimeter of growth that happened overnight.
Yeah.
You only notice the failures. This is exactly why tracking your data is the most powerful tool a beginner can have. I have to mention our work on this. Our team at Fish Keeping Life Co. specifically developed the Daily Tank Journal because we were failing at exactly this. We needed a way to log the ecosystem.
The journal is not about nostalgia. It is about data collection and recognizing long-term biological patterns. When you have a complex, slow-moving ecosystem, memory is completely unreliable. If you are tracking your exact lighting schedule, the specific date you push new root tabs into the sand, the temperature fluctuations, and noting even the most subtle growth changes week over week, you gain a massive analytical advantage.
You start to see the cause and effect that takes weeks to manifest. You might look back at your log and realize, oh, exactly 3 weeks after I added those specific root tabs, the dwarf sag stopped melting and pushed its first runner. That data is invaluable. It stops you from making panicked, emotional, impulsive changes that rip the ecosystem apart.
It forces you to operate at the speed of biology rather than the speed of anxiety. You can document the struggle. You write down, day 14, total melt, did not throw away. And then 50 days later, you get to write, day 64, first submerged leaf confirmed. It transforms the waiting period from a frustrating chore into an incredible, documented scientific observation.
It makes the slow journey deeply rewarding. And that slow journey is really the beating heart of everything we've explored today. We have covered a massive amount of technical and biological ground. Let's bring this all together for the ultimate takeaway.
That sounds like a good idea.
If you remember absolutely nothing else from this deep dive, remember this. You do not need to be wealthy to have a beautiful tank. You do not need to chase expensive pressurized gas canisters or buy stadium-level lighting. The secret to a lush carpet is alignment with nature. Choose a low-tech all-star plant like dwarf sagittaria, pygmy chainsword, or marsilea. Give them the localized nutrition they crave with root tabs. Provide moderate, highly consistent light so they don't stretch and panic. And then step back. Accept the biological shock of the melt. Trust the resilience of the roots, and let time do the heavy lifting.
I think that perfectly synthesizes the practical application of the science we've discussed. But before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a final, slightly provocative thought to completely reframe how you look at your glass box.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've spent an hour talking about carpets as a design element, a habitat, and a chemical sink. But I want you to look at your tank tonight and start thinking of your carpeting plants not as a decorative lawn, but as the living, breathing foundation of your aquarium's biological filter. They are the true engine of your ecosystem, actively pumping oxygen into the sand and starting out the algae. So the question is, how might treating your tiny, delicate plants as your primary heavy-duty filtration system completely change the way you maintain your tank? Would you be less eager to rip them up and move them? Would you finally view their agonizingly slow growth not as a personal failure, but as a complex filter slowly, deliberately maturing? It shifts the entire paradigm of what fish keeping actually is.
That is a phenomenal perspective shift. The plants are the filter. I absolutely love that. And that brings us to the end of our exploration today. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this masterclass has demystified the biology of carpeting plants, armed you with the chemistry you need to succeed, and given you the confidence to start a low-tech carpet of your own. For more deep dives, articles, and the tools we use, like the daily tank journal we mentioned, be sure to check out our ongoing research at Fishkeeping Life Co. and the Tank Guide. Until next time, embrace the patience, keep your hands wet, and enjoy the incredibly slow, rewarding journey of the planted tank ecosystem.